What's up, guys? This is Jeff from Sorta Healthy, and today we are talking about how to train athletes as a personal trainer. We're not looking at the phasing system that I use as a guide when working with athletes, as well as other personal training clients. I'll be explaining how to use this chart and referencing my workout chart throughout this video. You are all welcome to download and use these charts with your clients. Best part about that is they're free, and the link to download them is located in the video description. All I ask is that you guys like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, because that allows me to keep making free video content to help all of you guys out. Thank you so much for the support, everybody. It really does mean a lot. Before jumping into the more technical side of programming for athletes, I want to first acknowledge a few different things. First off, the typical personal trainer is going to work with exactly 0 professional athletes over the course of their career. Due to this, and also the fact that you are likely to be working with student athletes, at least on a semi-regular basis, as a personal trainer, mostly we'll be focusing on programming for student athletes today because that's who you're going to be working with. Make no mistake though, of course, a lot of these techniques would also work for higher level athletes as well. We also have to acknowledge that training every single athlete is a pretty different process. What sport your athlete is participating in, of course, has a huge effect on what their program is going to look like. Their age, their training experience, their strengths, their weaknesses, and their schedule. All those things are all going to have a big impact on their routine. So of course there's no way I'll be able to cram every single relevant piece of information when it comes to training athletes into this YouTube video. I will, however, give you a process and a blueprint that should work for training the vast amount of student athletes that come your way like a pro. First and foremost, just like working with any client, when working with an athlete, you have to first assess them. With every athlete that I work with, I always do some kind of movement screen or assessment. Most often I use the functional movement screen, and it works really well for revealing imbalances between the right and left side of the body, and it also works very well to reveal any issues they may have with a whole bunch of different fundamental movement patterns. So you should also do some kind of movement screen with your athlete clients, whether you use the functional movement screen or any of the other movement screens available to personal trainers. Typically, I'm also going to do some physical tests with my athlete client. If it makes sense to do a 3-minute step test to determine their cardiovascular response to exercise, I'll include that one. I'll also do a maximal push-up or bench press test, whichever one makes more sense for the athlete. And I'm pretty much always going to do a sprint type test. The one that I do most often in my studio is the 1-minute Airdyne sprint test. And that's where you have your client sprint on the Airdyne for 60 seconds and calculate how many calories they burn. If it makes sense for the client, I'll throw in some muscular endurance tests like the maximal plank test. I only do body fat and circumference measurements if it's important to the athlete client. A lot of times student athletes don't really care that much about circumference measurements or body fat measurements, or even their weight for that matter. It really does depend on what sport they are participating in. So also taking into account that I might only have a limited time span with this athlete client, I make sure to only do the portions of the assessment that I feel are important to them and also relevant to the sport that they are participating in. If you want to see how this compares to a typical client assessment, check out this video right here. Now in this assessment, if I find anything that my client in particular has an issue with, for example, let's say they can't perform a push-up without their trunk kind of sagging a little bit. This will definitely have an effect on my programming going forward. In that specific case, my client probably lacks the core control to keep their torso rigid when they're coming up from a push-up. And of course, certain core exercises could definitely help to fix that. Too many examples like this exist for me to list all of them, so make sure to assess your client and figure out where they need extra attention. Beyond that, there are some fundamental things that you're going to do with the vast majority of your athlete clients. Do fundamental compound movements every session and progress them over time. These fundamental compound movements include squats, deadlifts, bench press plus push-up variations, rows, pull-downs plus pull-up chin-up variations, overhead presses, rotational core exercises, core stability exercises such as carries and planks, sprinting type exercises, single leg strengthening exercises such as lunges and split squats, and plyometric exercises too. I would argue that these exercises should be front and center, not only when you're training your athletes, but pretty much when you're training just about any personal training client. But because athletes are pushing their bodies harder than average everyday people, they don't have time for BS, fluff, accessory movement exercises. They need to be doing things that are actually going to make them better at the sport that they're participating in. So which exercises should I be doing the most? Well, like we said before, that does depend on your client. It depends on where they're strong and where they're not so strong. Of course, it also very much depends on their sport. For example, if I had a client who was playing American football, I need to focus on explosive power, primarily in the lower body. I'm going to be working on fast explosive movements like the squat and deadlift. Upper body strength is also pretty important for these athletes, especially the pushing motion, which of course you would train in a bench press. They also need to sprint, so yeah, I'm gonna make them sprint. By the way guys, if you don't have a good area to have your client sprint, try deadmill sprints. Basically, leave your treadmill off and have your athlete move the belt as fast as they can by sprinting. I also use an Airdyne bike for sprinting exercises too. It definitely might make your athlete miserable, but it is effective. I would still do all these other compound exercises with my football athlete client, but I might not do them as often as the other ones that I mentioned before. Now let's say I have a soccer athlete or a rest of the world football client. I would still put a huge value on lower body strength and explosiveness, so some of the lower body exercises might look pretty similar compared to the football athlete. I would still do some upper body work with this client, but not as much as I would with the American football client. And also my rep scheme is going to look a little bit different for this soccer athlete. And obviously if I had a volleyball athlete and a tennis athlete as well, their programs would also have some similarities to the previous two that I mentioned before, but there would definitely be some key differences within any of those sporting programs too. I mentioned reps a few seconds ago. Let's talk more about reps and sets and all that good stuff too. When working with any client for an extended period of time, I use this phasing chart which utilizes undulating periodization. Undulating periodization is a nonlinear periodization that changes up variables such as tempo, sets, reps, and exercise selection on a daily, weekly, or even multi-weekly schedule. I will typically change up my long-term athletes' workout variables about every 4 weeks. If they're feeling a little bit burned out in a strength phase though, for example, I certainly have no issue mixing in some lighter days if it makes sense for the athlete. Unless my athlete is an experienced lifter, which honestly most are not, they start off working in what I call the foundational phase. In this phase, we have a moderate rep count and we are focusing on mastering the form in the exercises that I showed you before. After that, most likely I'm going to be moving my athlete client into a strength-based phase, where yeah, you guessed it, we try to build strength. There we do 3 to 5 sets of every exercise, and we keep our rep count pretty low, 1 to 7 reps, working at an 80-90% intensity. If I'm training an athlete who's doing a sport like American football, where you really need that explosive power, I'm gonna try and keep their rep counts for certain exercises really low. If I'm training an athlete playing a sport like soccer, they still need that explosive power, but they also need endurance too, so I would still keep their rep counts low on certain days, and maybe I would do some higher rep count days with those soccer athletes as well. After 4 weeks of working primarily on strength and power, I'm either going to move my athlete to working on a little bit more hypertrophy or building muscle mass or muscular endurance. It really depends on what myself and the athlete feel that they need most for their sport. Again, if they're an American football player or a wrestler, they might have to put on a little bit more muscle mass, in which case that hypertrophy phase, that's going to be really useful to them. Of course, there are lots of different sports where muscular endurance would be useful, so if that's the more useful thing, I'm going to work on muscular endurance first. If I feel like I need to change around the order of these phases for my athlete to achieve the best results, I will do so, no big deal. Now we're taking a quick glance at 2 workouts for a teenage football player and 2 workouts for a teenage soccer player. Let's assume that both of these 2 athletes are very new to lifting. Let's also only focus on the lower body portion of this workout. The football player is doing 10 reps in the foundational phase, working at about 80-90% intensity. And he's doing that for all of these 3 exercises right here. As you can see, the 10, 10, and 10. He's also doing the same thing on the second day, 10, 10, and 10. This first number is weight, again reps, and sets. If we look at the soccer player's lower body workout, the exercises are the same. The soccer player is also working at 80-90% intensity, but they are doing less weight and more reps. And this trend would most likely keep going forward with both of these 2 athletes' programs. Let's say I only have my athlete for a month or 2, and I don't have that much time for phasing. Unfortunately, this happens all the time within personal training because you have parents kind of just dropping their kids off starting a personal training program, and they don't really give you as the trainer a ton of time to work with their kid leading up to the season. Well, if you're working with that limited time frame, still take everything else that I mentioned previously into account. You still need to assess them and figure out where they're strong and where they're not so strong. And then of course, we're still going to use those same compound movements and exercises that we mentioned before to help our clients get the best possible results. And we're going to make these crucial exercises more challenging over time, primarily just by adding weight to the barbell or dumbbells or whatever you're using with your client over time. And of course, there are other variables you could change around like rep counts as well. But of course, the main objective is to make things progressively harder over time. and to help them get stronger over time. If you're working with them while they're in season, do all of this, but don't brutalize them right before a big sporting event. You will definitely have to taper off the intensity leading up to competition or games. Do not give your athlete client very difficult workouts leading up to these games or competitions. We are trying to improve their performance, not hinder it. If I'm working with a soccer player on Wednesday and they have a game on Thursday, I might do some agility work with that client. I might do some lighter rep work with some of the compound movements, and I might also do some mobility work too, but that won't be a day where I try and make them squat the most weight that they've ever squatted before. So you're definitely going to have to plan accordingly based on these athletes' schedules, and you're going to have to make sure that they get enough recovery time in when you're combining your sessions in with their traditional practices as well. And that, my friends, is no easy task, but if you do it and you do it well, those athletes will love you for all the progress that you've helped them make, and they'll tell all their athlete friends about you. So do it. And that's all we have for today, everybody. Hopefully you guys found the content in today's video useful. If you guys have any questions or comments on anything that we talked about today, of course, do not forget to leave a comment down below and I will answer it. As always, if you haven't liked the video or subscribed to the channel, please do so because it does help the channel to grow, allowing me to make more content for you guys. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and I will see you in the next video.